Hey, what's going on, friends? This is Paul Hutchings. Hope you're having a great day. I'm actually live. I haven't gone live in a while because I have some interesting things to talk about today that you may find very useful in both learning how to become a better thinker and also having what I believe to be a more accurate view of money so that you can use money in the best ways to serve you in helping to create a better future. Of course, you may know my vision is freedom through principle-centered leadership. So I love sharing ideas about anything that can help people do that. So today is going to be super interesting, I think. If you are tuning in live, please comment below. Let me know. I'll be able to see the chat feed as we're going through this content. And just want to start off with an introduction. So I titled this live today, something about money, conspiracy, AI, and the quest for freedom and truth. And it looks like it all showed up accurately on social media, so that's good. So where did this come from? Well, this last week I published a blog post about a book that I read early on, my journey to financial freedom. I was actually living in a single wide mobile home, and I started learning about, the idea that I potentially could become financially free. And I became really interested in reading books about money. I wanted to understand, what is money? Where does it come from? What was its historical evolution? How does it work today? Because I felt that the more I understood money, the more I could make good decisions around money so that I could build a life of freedom. So one of the books that I read early on, and I want to share this, it's called The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. I think I mentioned I published a blog post about this book earlier this week. And not only did I publish a blog post about this book, but on our Grow Rich Mastermind, which is a call we do every morning, Monday through Friday, all about freedom, success, money, learning how to live the best life you can. We do this mastermind every day, have done it for 14 years. It's an hour long where we learn some things, then we have an interesting discussion on the ideas that we've covered. So I was attending the Grow Rich Mastermind, and I had shared two things about money on that mastermind. The first thing I shared was a quote that I had picked up from Elon Musk a while back, and it's basically Elon Musk describing how he views money. And it was different from any other definition of money that I've ever heard, and so I was really interested in it. And I remembered it, and I passed it along on the mastermind, and I'll pass it along to you here now. So the quote is something to the effect of, money is nothing more than a database for the allocation of resources. Money is nothing more than a database for the allocation of resources. So I'd never heard that before, and it really has caused me to think about that. The other thing that I shared on the mastermind was some of the ideas from this book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. Because in this book, now this is a 600-page book, but in this book, G. Edward Griffin gives a history of the Federal Reserve and how it started in America back in 1913, I believe, when Woodrow Wilson was the president, if my memory serves me correctly. And part of the reason that I want to get this information out is because the information that I picked up in this book, greatly impacted me at a young age in two areas. One, it really motivated me to get out of debt and create financial freedom. And then the second thing it did was it gave me what I believe to be a more accurate way to look at money, so that I can make better decisions. So I shared a little bit about, and also, if what G. Edward Griffin writes about in this book is accurate, now it's 600 pages. So I'm not going to say that every single thing is accurate, but what I would argue for is that the main argument that he puts forth in this book, as far as where money comes from, how it's created, how it filters out through society, how it flows through the banking systems, this main argument, I would say, as far as I'm able to ascertain, is very accurate. And the reason I would say that is because I have researched and fact-checked, as best I can. And if that main argument is true, then relating to what Elon Musk said, money is nothing more but a database for the allocation of resources. The reason these two ideas are so important in my view is that if what G. Edward Griffin writes about in this book, at least the main argument, is accurate, then what we can conclude is that the database for the allocation of resources has been and still is corrupted in a major, major way. And so on the call today, Jessie, my friend, was hosting, and she mentioned these couple ideas that I had shared. And in passing, she said something that really sparked a train of thought in me, and it led me over to artificial intelligence to have this conversation that I'm going to share with you today that I think is very fascinating. So what Jessie said was she shared the quote from Elon Musk, and then she mentioned, this book. And then she said, kind of in passing, that G. Edward Griffin is a conspiracy theorist. So take what you read with a grain of salt, is what she said. And so, I've heard this phrase conspiracy theorist for a long time, which I'm sure you have as well, if you've been paying attention. And the thing that I want to say one thing about this term conspiracy theorist, and then I want to get into this chat with AI because I had a conversation with AI about this term. What I believe the term conspiracy theorist to, the thing that that phrase does is it's what we would call, or what I would call, a thought stopper. A thought stopper. If you say so-and-so is a conspiracy theorist, so like if I say Edward Griffin is a conspiracy theorist, in a lot of people's minds, when they hear that phrase, the thinking is done. The thoughts are stopped. Oh, he's one of those. Well, now I don't need to look into his book and I don't need to pay attention to what he says because he is a conspiracy theorist. So before I get into this discussion with AI here, I would say be very, very careful about using that word and be very, very careful about allowing other people's use of that word to affect how you view people and ideas, because if it stops your thinking, even if G. Edward Griffin in some areas of something that he said throughout his career might be accurately termed as a conspiracy theory, that doesn't mean that everything that he wrote about is a conspiracy or is a theory. And now it's been a long time since I read this book, but I remember when I read this book for the first time, one of the things that I really love about this book is it is jam-packed with footnotes and resources that you literally can go verify. And I remember when I went through this book, 600 pages, I'm not going to say I checked every footnote, but a lot of them I did. I tracked down because I wanted accurate information. I didn't want inaccurate information. One of the laws of success, as taught by Napoleon Hill, is accurate thought. So we need to have accurate information in order to think accurately. So all of that to say, this is the lead up to this conversation. It got me thinking, okay, well, the main point of The Creature from Jekyll Island, about the banking system and how it works, is that a conspiracy theory or is that more accurate? And the way that I view it in my mind, the way that he wrote about it in this book, is that accurate or is that conspiracy theory? And also, so what of it, right? There's a great book called How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler, and he says that's a question you should ask when deciding what information to consume. And then also after you've consumed information, always ask the question, what of it? What's the point? And one thing I will say about, conspiracy theories in general, the other day I posted a poll sort of, moon landing, real or fake. And I posted that because a discussion in my family came up about it and there were different opinions on it. So I was like, wow, this is fascinating. I wonder what all my friends think about it. So I posted that. And with that particular thing, as well as maybe a lot of other things that could be classified as conspiracy theories, I think, there's entertainment value. So if you're entertained by something that might be called a conspiracy theory, have at it, But as far as useful information for your life, I do agree that we probably don't want to go down big, deep rabbit holes that may not have any actual impact on our daily lives. And so this particular book, hey, Veroni, good to see you. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. So this particular book, because it talks about money, is very, very, very relevant to my life and to yours. So let's get into the chat that I had. Hey, Bill, good to see you. The chat I had with AI, where I did my best to ask questions and fact-checked some of these conclusions. And as I mentioned, I have a blog post about this book, and I have a video from the author where he gives kind of a summary, because this book is 600 pages. You might not want to read the whole book, but you can get a summary of his main points, which I'm kind of going to give you as we jump into this AI chat here. So, are you guys excited to learn more about money? Are you excited to think a little differently? Are you excited to challenge the status quo? Comment below if you are, because this is going to be a very fascinating discussion here. So, let me move my screen so we can see it. So, I'm using ChatGPT, GPT-4, and here's the discussion, okay? So, can you explain to me how Congress gets money from the Federal Reserve in order to increase the money supply, and explain it to me like I'm 8 years old? The reason I asked that question, Bill Fever says yes. Awesome. High five, Bill. The reason I asked that question is because in this book, what G. Edward Griffin says is that when Congress wants to print more money, get more money, because Congress, the federal government gets money in a couple of ways, mainly. A, they tax us, and B, they create more money, right? So one of the things, Veronique says, everything is fascinating, never too old to learn more. I love that about you, Veronique. I think we should always have an open mind. So G. Edward Griffin says, the way this is set up is that Congress actually does not print the money. Now, if you read the Constitution, it says that Congress has the power to coin money. Congress, okay? So what G. Edward Griffin says in this book is that in 1913, a group of powerful people representing what was 25% of the world's wealth at the time got together on Jekyll Island in Georgia with the specific intent to form a cartel or a group that was in charge of the money. And at the time, and this is pretty historical, like you can read about this in history. At the time, there was a general sentiment in society about, we don't trust the money trusts. We don't trust these big bankers on Wall Street. We don't trust them. We got to get them out. We don't trust the monopoly-sized businesses that are exerting so much control. So there was this general sentiment against some of these people, and they knew that there was no way that they could take control of the money system unless they did it in secret and unless they did it by strategy. So what happened was, according to G. Edward Griffin, is these interests secretly met in Jekyll Island for the purpose to hatch a plan by which they could somehow wrest the power from Congress to create the money over to them and be in control of the money system. And what G. Edward Griffin says is that after the Federal Reserve Act was passed, it was no longer Congress creating the money, but instead, this is what he said, this is how he said it works. He said Congress, when they want to print more money, and the Treasury's mixed in here too, so I'm not 100% sure, the exact flow, but in essence, Congress or the Treasury, Congress, I think, goes to the Federal Reserve and says, hey, we need more money. So the Federal Reserve will sell bonds to Congress, which Congress will buy these bonds. And I'm probably not describing that 100% accurately, but basically the point is that Congress will get money from the Federal Reserve. So it's not Congress that makes the money. It's now the Federal Reserve that makes the money. And there's a bonding process in there, which will probably be explained a little bit better when we go through this chat I had with AI. So in other words, the Federal Reserve is printing the money. Congress is going in debt to the Federal Reserve, which means Congress now has money, but they borrowed it from the Federal Reserve, which means they have to pay the money back with interest. And then where did the Federal Reserve get the money? What G. Edward Griffin says is that it was created out of thin air. So back to this initial question that I asked artificial intelligence, and also just fair disclaimer, one of the challenges with AI is that it can occasionally hallucinate, which is make stuff up. So we'll take that into consideration. And so anything I read to you in this AI chat, please feel free to go verify for yourself if you have not already done so. Bill says, great comment, banks can create money too, right? That is 100% true. And that's the second point of what he talks about in this book, which is crucial to understand, I think, if we want to make good decisions around money. Okay, so this is just the beginning. So Bill, thank you for the comment, and let's jump over here to the chat. So, is G. Edward Griffin a conspiracy theorist? Did he make this stuff up? Dear AI, please explain to me how Congress gets money and explain it to me like I'm 8 years old. Hey, Paul, so imagine the Federal Reserve is like a big bank for the whole country, and Congress is like a family that needs money for important stuff. The Federal Reserve can create more money, kind of like getting more monopoly money. Now, it's interesting that phrase is used when you're playing the game. They don't exactly give this money straight to Congress, but they use tricks to make it more available. One way they do this is by lowering interest rates, which is like making it cheaper for people and businesses to borrow money. When it's cheaper to borrow, people spend more and businesses grow. Okay, so that's one way. Here's the key point though. Another way is by buying stuff like government bonds. This is like the Federal Reserve giving a loan to the government, and in return, the government promises to pay back later with a little extra. By buying these bonds, the Federal Reserve pumps more money into the economy, kind of like adding fuel to a fire to make it bigger. So the Federal Reserve doesn't hand over a stack of cash to Congress, but it uses these special methods to make sure there's enough money. So in essence, it does seem like the Federal Reserve does give Congress a big stack of money because it says they buy bonds. So I would assume that money is paid for those bonds, and I would then therefore assume that Congress is receiving money, right? So here's the next golden question. Where does the Federal Reserve get the money to buy the bonds? Good question, right? And if Congress was printing the money, they would just print the money, correct? They would not need to borrow it from somewhere. We wouldn't need to wonder, where's the money coming from? But Congress is not doing that. The Federal Reserve is doing that. So let's come back over here and see what AI tells me about this. All right, G, here's the deal. The Federal Reserve is kind of like a magical money creator. When they decide to buy bonds, they don't give it to a giant vault. They don't have to go to a giant vault. So translation, they don't have to have any money. Instead, they basically create it out of thin air, which is what we would expect Congress to do per the Constitution, correct? Like, am I stating this correctly? Like, we understand that Congress has the power to print money per the Constitution. So why is the Federal Reserve now doing it instead of Congress? This is what the main part of the main argument in this book is that the Federal Reserve in 1913 took that power from Congress. So now, instead of Congress creating the money and not being in debt to anyone, now the Federal Reserve is creating the money, and Congress, aka us, people, right? We are now in debt to the Federal Reserve. So interesting, right? So where does Federal Reserve get the money? They're a magical money machine. They can print it. So now Federal Reserve, and this raises some other interesting questions, like who is the Federal Reserve? Who owns the Federal Reserve? Who runs the Federal Reserve? Now, we have some simple answers to these questions. We know that the Federal Reserve Chairman makes a report to Congress, right? But the Federal Reserve Chairman is not an owner. He's not a power entity behind the Federal Reserve. I wonder who that is. I wonder who's collecting the interest that the people are paying back on the money that was created out of thin air. Good question, right? These are good questions, I think. So let me jump back to the screen share here. Okay, so when they buy the bonds, they just make an entry in their system that says, hey, we're paying for these bonds, and bam, the money is there. This new money then goes to the bank accounts of the people or groups who sold the bonds. It's all done with computers and numbers without any real cash moving around. It's a bit like magic, but it's actually how modern economies work. The Federal Reserve has this special power to create money, which keeps the economy running smoothly, especially when things get rough. Okay, so far so good. So far what I'm learning matches up with what G. Edward Griffin writes about in this book. Let's continue on. Does the Federal Reserve collect interest on these bonds the government buys from them? So does the Federal Reserve collect interest on the money that they create out of thin air? Dun dun dun. Yup, Paul, you've got it. The Federal Reserve does collect interest on the government bonds it buys. Here's how it works. The government issues these bonds as a way to borrow money. They're like IOUs. When the Fed buys these bonds, it's lending money to the government. In return, the government pays interest on these bonds, just like you'd pay interest on a loan or a credit card. But here's a fun twist. The Federal Reserve sends most of its earnings, including the interest from these bonds, back to the Treasury Department. Okay, so this is an interesting claim from AI. It's saying that the Federal Reserve sends most of their profits back to the Treasury Department. Okay. Now, here's a question that I will throw out and an observation. As far as I know, Congress has never audited the Federal Reserve. Never, ever. So this claim from AI that the Federal Reserve is, they're giving most of the money back to the Treasury, we don't actually know that for sure. And an easy way to verify this for yourself, if you haven't done so already, there's a guy named Ron Paul who was a congressman for a lot of years. He's no longer a congressman. Now his son Rand Paul is a congressman currently, I believe from Kentucky. But Ron Paul, for his entire time he was a congressman, he would grill the Federal Reserve chair. He was like, we need to audit the Fed. Who are these people? What are they doing? Why do we not audit the Fed? For his entire career in Congress. And all of these videos are recorded. They're on the internet. You can watch them. So if he, in front of the world, is saying we need to audit the Federal Reserve and nobody is challenging him, I think a senator, right? Rand is a senator. So I think we can fairly assume that Congress is not auditing the Fed. We don't know what's happening with that money. So interesting. Who are these people that are printing the money, collecting interest on it, and that seemingly have no, and I gotta be careful with this. They have no oversight with any teeth. Okay, because you can make an argument that there's oversight because we bring the Fed chair in every so often and we ask him questions and we listen. That's one form of oversight. But if you can't look at the books, how good is the oversight? It's not real oversight, right? That's how I see it. So Bill Fever says the national debt is out of hand. Now the president just spends money without congressional approval. Yeah, that seems accurate. So let's continue on with this little fun chat with AI. Okay, so let's see. It's all part of the big economic dance. Okay, so here's my golden question. Who owns the Federal Reserve? Do you guys know who owns the Federal Reserve? I'd love to hear. Here's what AI says. Hey, broski, the ownership of the Federal Reserve is a bit of a unique setup. It's not owned by the government, but it's not a private corporation either. Kind of a mix of both. And then it goes into telling me how the Federal Reserve is set up, which we all know, 12 national Federal Reserve banks, and they're owned by private banks in their region. But who's at the top? When I say who owns it, I don't want to know how it's set up. I want to know who owns it. Who's the shot callers at the top? Who's collecting the interest? Who's deciding how much of that interest supposedly is said back to the people, aka the government? We don't know. So member banks own stock, blah, blah, blah. Here's the twist. Even though these private banks own the stock, they don't control the Federal Reserve. The Fed operates independently of the government. Key line there. But it's still accountable to Congress. How is it accountable? Please tell me. The president appoints the Fed's board of governors, including its chair, and Senate confirms them. So it's like a hybrid car. Okay, so blah, blah, blah. The president appoints the Fed chair, And the Senate confirms them. So this is the oversight without teeth that I was talking about earlier. Yeah, quote unquote oversight, but who's at the top? Who are these people running the Federal Reserve? So let's continue on and not get too far into theory and conspiracy theories. When you say it's accountable to Congress, does that mean Congress audits the Federal Reserve's books and practices? Good question. Great question, Paul. So when we say the Federal Reserve is accountable to Congress, it doesn't exactly mean Congress audits the Fed's books in the traditional sense, like an accountant going through your receipts. It's more about oversight and reporting. Bingo! Bingo! They don't go through their receipts. They don't go through their books. They don't know what's going on under the hood. They just have some surface level, hey, general public, we're monitoring the Federal Reserve stuff going on. That's my view. The Federal Reserve has to report to Congress regularly. The Federal Reserve gives testimony to Congress twice a year, yes, which we all know, updating them on what the Fed is doing, how they're handling monetary policy. But here's the deal about the audits. The Fed's financial statements are actually audited every year by an independent outside firm, not by Congress. Okay, so that's interesting. I don't know if that's true, but I would be interested to know who's this accounting firm. And why did Ron Paul not know about it? And why was Ron Paul not satisfied with whatever results they were putting out? My guess is, here's something that I've seen in some institutions, is that they'll have an independent outside firm audit a set of books. But what they do is the auditor will come back and say, everything's good. And that's the conclusion of the independent audit. So sometimes independent audit doesn't actually mean I went through all the books, here's a copy so everyone can see, everything looks good. No, they leave the part out about what the books are, and then the independent auditor comes back and says, everything's good. So I don't know for sure. I haven't researched that part, but my guess is probably something like that is going on. So let's get back over here to the... Okay, so here's the next part. And by the way, what of it? What does any of this stuff matter? What does it mean to any of our daily lives? And it's a good question, because like I said earlier, we never want to go down a rabbit hole of whatever information we're looking at only to be feeling dejected, frustrated, mad, angry with no useful actions to take in our lives. That's not what this is. What I'm sharing here today, I have found to be extremely useful for my financial journey. So so we've covered where the money gets created originally, gets it from the Federal Reserve, creates the money, gives it to Congress in the form of bonds. Congress now has the money, but they now owe that money plus interest back to the Federal Reserve. So that's step one. And G. Edward Griffin explains exactly that in this book. Step two is what happens in the banks, and this is going back to what Bill Fever mentioned earlier about how the banks themselves can create money. So we've got money created out of nothing up here, and now it gets down to the banks, and then we got more money created. And this is typically done through a process known as fractional reserve banking. Now, one of the things that I love about this book is it points out that in the banking world, and sometimes in government as well, but specifically the banking world, they like to use these big terms that sound sophisticated and hard to understand. But really, if you boil it down to a simplistic level, it's very easy to understand. Fractional reserve banking is one of those terms. You just hear the term and you're like, oh, that sounds legit. Good to go. Don't want to know anything more about it. On with my day, right? But fractional reserve banking is how banks can create more money from the money that they have. So let's get back into it. And this really applies, I think, to how we live and how we do business and how we plan for the future. So can you explain fractional reserve banking to me like I'm 8? So again, I'm kind of fact checking some of the stuff G. Edward Griffin writes about in this book. Sure thing, broski. Imagine you have 10 candies and you decide to keep them safe at a friend's house. Let's call your friend Bank. Now, Bank is smart and knows that you won't need all 10 candies at once, so Bank gives a few of your candies to other friends who need them right now. Let's say 7 candies. Bank keeps a few, like 3 candies, just in case you come back and want some. This is what banks do with the money. When you put your money in a bank, the bank doesn't just put it in a big vault and forget about it. Instead, they lend most of it out to other people or businesses who need a loan. The bank then keeps a small portion of the money, like your 3 candies, as a reserve, just in case a bunch of people come to take their money out at the same time. This is called fractional reserve banking. The fractional part means the bank only keeps a fraction of the money it holds. Now, I discovered something kind of shocking that I'm going to get to here in just a moment about this part. The fractional part means the bank only keeps a fraction of the money it holds. So stay tuned with me here. And the rest of it is used for loans. It's like making your money do double duty, safekeeping for you and helping others at the same time. So I'm going to jump back here to the feed. And are you guys still with me? Are you still tuned in? Comment below if we still have people live on the live. And let me know if you're following what I'm sharing here today. And let me know if any of this stuff is new. And let me know if you have any questions about any of this stuff. So Bill Fever says, yes, thank you, Bill. So the fractional reserve banking part, okay? So it's like if I go to the bank and I put $1,000 in, fractional reserve banking says my bank does not have to keep my $1,000 there. Instead, they can loan out a big portion, thank you, Veronique, a big portion of that money to other people. So let's say the bank has a reserve requirement of 10%, and I take $1,000 and I say, I want to put this in my savings account. I want to put this in my checking account. Well, they're going to take $900 of that $1,000 that I put in and loan it out to someone else. They're going to pay me a small interest rate on the money I put in, and then they're going to charge a higher interest rate on the money they send out. Fractional reserve banking. This is partly what fractional reserve banking is. Now, as I was thinking about this process, I could not help but think about something that comes up every now and then within my profession. I'm in the home business profession, network marketing, affiliate marketing. And one of the things that often comes up in this type of business, not often, but occasionally, is that's a Ponzi scheme. That's a Ponzi scheme. So it begs the question, what is a Ponzi scheme? And I've been very curious about this, so I wanted to know. Because if someone says my business is a Ponzi scheme, I better know what a Ponzi scheme is, make sure that I'm not in one, and then be able to explain, actually, no, this is what a Ponzi scheme is, and this is not that, right? So I wanted to understand what a Ponzi scheme is. So on a basic level, a Ponzi scheme, and so let me jump into this. On a basic level, a Ponzi scheme is where I say to Bill Fever, hey, Bill, I got this great investment. It's, whatever, silver or this new business or whatever. I say, I got this great investment. It's producing a lot of cash flow. So Bill Fever, if you will give me your money, I promise you, Bill, that I will give you a return on that money. Okay? And so that's step one of a Ponzi scheme. Step two is I then go to Veronique and say the same thing. I say, Veronique, I got this great thing going on. Would you give me your money and I'll pay you a % return? So now I have Bill's money and I have Veronique's money. Now, another core important aspect of a Ponzi scheme is the guy or the gal running it usually does not actually have any legitimate business going on. There's not a product, there's not a service, it's a fiction. And so what happens when Bill Fever wants his return on his money he gave me, I take Veronique's money that she gave me and I use some of that to pay Bill's return. And then I get more people into this thing. So I'm collecting people from everybody. I'm promising them all a return. And then I'm using their money to pay the returns on the money that everybody gave me. So doesn't that sound like a bank? I mean, honestly, I was like, how is a bank different from this? How? So I made a post. Hey, Kevin, good to see you. He says, great to be here. Thank you. He says, great info. I appreciate it. So I posted a question on Facebook this week. It said something like, it wasn't a question. It said, don't do Ponzi schemes, in parentheses, unless you're a bank, because you lack the legal protection. So, and I'm kind of joking here, but this is a legitimate question, don't you think? Like, if a Ponzi scheme is taking money from people, promising returns, and using everyone else's money to pay the returns, if that's a Ponzi scheme, I don't understand at first thought how that's different from what a bank does, because that sounds like what a bank's doing. It's taking money from people, promising returns, and then using the money that everyone gives them to pay the returns. So the bank, though, it's legally protected to do this. That's an important distinction. And so just interesting thing to think about. I'm not saying banks are Ponzi schemes. What I am saying is it's interesting to think about these things. So let's continue on. And what I shared will fuel some of what comes next. So then I say, after the fractional reserve banking, so some of my money is used to give to others and the bank pays me a return on its use. Exactly, Paul. When you put your money in the bank uses some of it to lend to other people. They charge those people interest on the loans. Now, because the bank is using your money to make these loans, they pay you that interest back as return on your deposit. It's kind of like if you lent your video games to a friend and your friend paid you for using them, you still own the games. So I guess one distinction here would be a bank is actually loaning money out to people, whereas in a Ponzi scheme, they're usually not doing that. They're just collecting money. So I guess you could say that one legitimate operation of a bank is making loans. Another one that I was thinking about would be, there are definitely some benefits to banking. You've got your online transactions stored. You've got debit cards. So you could probably say that those are legitimate products that the bank, offers to us. So again, I'm not saying a bank is a Ponzi scheme. I'm just trying to make distinctions as to what is happening in both of these things. So it basically goes on to explain what I just explained about how the bank, collects money and pays interest. Okay, so here's a question. Where does the bank get the money to pay me interest on my money? Great point, Paul. The money the bank pays you as interest comes mainly from the interest they charge on loans they give to other people. Here's how it rolls. You deposit money, you put your money in a bank. Bank lends money. The bank lends out a portion of your money. Interest on loans. The bank charges those borrowers interest. Think of it as a fee for the service of lending them money. Then the bank pays you. Part of the money is made from this interest is given back to you as the interest on your deposit. So in simple terms, the bank uses the money. Okay, I think we kind of understand that. So then I say, how is this different from a Ponzi scheme? Hey, broski, I get why you might think there's a similarity, but fractional reserve banking and Ponzi schemes are actually quite different animals. Here's the lowdown. Okay, I think this is funny. Fractional reserve banking. This is a legit system where banks lend out a portion of the deposits they hold. The key is they keep enough reserves to meet the everyday withdrawal demands of their customers. Banks earn money by charging higher interest on loans than what they pay on deposits. It's a regulated system. So in other words, it's legal. That's one difference with the other differences that I mentioned earlier. Ponzi scheme. Now, this is a type of fraud. It's named after a guy named Charles Ponzi who pulled off this scam back in the day. In a Ponzi scheme, the operator promises high returns on investments. The tricky part is they use new investors' money to pay returns to earlier investors rather than earning profit through legitimate business activities. So so there's two key distinctions, right? One is fractional reserve banking is regulated, so it's legal. But then the second one is that there's legitimate business happening, okay? So yeah, I get that. And there is legitimate business in the form of making loans. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit here. Going back to what my friend Jesse said about this book, that it was written by a conspiracy theorist. So something that I have heard, and this actually comes from Robert Kennedy, RFK, son of JFK. And I'd heard this before him, but I've heard it quite a bit from him, is Robert Kennedy claimed that the use of the word conspiracy theorist was at least brought to mainstream during the Warren Commission, the commission that was assigned to investigate the assassination of JFK. This is Robert Kennedy's father. So he made that claim. So I'm wondering in my brain, is that true? Did the CIA actually plant this term of conspiracy theory into people's minds as a form of thought stopping? Okay, so that's the question I have. So let's get back to AI and continue on here. So when was the first documented use of the word conspiracy theory in American literature? It says it has a fascinating history. It first appeared print in 1870, historical review by Carl Pearson, Journal of Medical Science. So we can say that the CIA for sure did not invent the term conspiracy theory because it's got a genealogy going back before the 60s. Okay, so that's what I learned from this. But then my next question, when did the use of the word rise in popular culture in USA, and were there any specific catalysts for this rise? Now, before I share this next part, I got Robert Kennedy he's Bobby Kennedy's son. Okay, good point. Yeah, thank you for that. So Bobby Kennedy was assassinated also. Is that right? So JFK was assassinated. Robert Kennedy was Bobby Kennedy's son, and then Bobby Kennedy was assassinated also. So 2 people assassinated in Bobby Kennedy's direct upline in the family tree. Okay, thank you for that correction, Bill. I appreciate that. So if we know the term conspiracy theory goes back before the 60s, the next question is, well, did the CIA have any role in popularizing this term? And one thing I did at this point in the conversation is I went to Google, I searched it up, and I instantly found an article from the Associated Press that says, fact checked, CIA did not originate the term conspiracy theory. And then in the article it says basically what AI just told me, which is, no, it's been in use a long time. CIA, nothing to do with it. This is a false claim. It's fake news, right? So I could stop my thoughts right there, or I could continue to wonder if there's anything that's being left out of the explanation that I've received so far, right? And again, this idea of thought stopping. See an official news article from the Associated Press. They say, nope, nothing to see here. Move on. A lot of people will just move on. So this is where the next part of the discussion gets interesting, I think. So it says, when did it rise in popular culture? Okay, the term conspiracy theory really started gaining traction in popular culture in the United States in the 1960s. Interesting. When was JFK assassinated? 1960s. Especially following the assassination of JFK in 1963. The Warren Commission's report, which concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, blah, 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 it said it mentioned conspiracy theory in some of the CIA internal memos. So I say, did the CIA play any role in making this term more top of mind in America? The idea that the CIA popularized the term conspiracy theory is more complex than it might seem. The term itself was in use before the CIA's establishment. Okay, so far so good. The Library of Congress shows the phrase appearing in newspapers as early as 1868. Okay, so far so good. Furthermore, the term conspiracy theorist was already in use by 1956, predating the JFK assassination. Distinction here, though, in use is not the same as predominantly in use. Okay. Historical and linguistic analyses suggest that the term gained popularity due to the works of intellectuals like Karl Popper and Richard Hofstadter, which are scientists. And then we come down here. Although the CIA did use the term conspiracy theory in internal documents during the 1960s to discredit critics of the Warren Report, the term was already widespread by that time. Scholars like Michael Butter and Davis Catherine Olmsted asserted that there is no indicator the CIA's memo had any significant impact on the popularity of the concept, and that the term was already popular as a pejorative before the CIA's usage. So while the CIA might have employed the term in its efforts, it wasn't the originator, true, like I think that's true, or the main driver. So it finishes up there. So I'm going to plant a quick seed. So one thought that I came away with after reading that was that, okay, the CIA mentioned conspiracy theory in some of its memos. No big deal, right? But there's more to the story. So let's continue on. At this point, I shift gears back to the fractional reserve banking. If I deposit $1,000 at the bank, how much can the bank loan out to others? Now here's the shocker. As of 2024, the reserve requirement for banks in the U.S. is set at 0%. This means that when you deposit $1,000 in a bank, the bank can technically lend out all of that $1,000 to others. There's no longer a requirement for the bank to keep a certain percentage of deposits as reserves. This change gives banks more flexibility. Of course it does. So according to this, there is no reserve requirement. That's crazy, I think. So now, if this is true, the banks don't even have to hold any of our money. We put it in, they loan it all out, okay? So here's another question. Can they loan out more than the $1,000? So if I put 1,000 in and they can loan 100% out, can they loan out more than the money I put in there? So in other words, back to what Bill Fever said, the banks can create money as well. Now that's where it gets interesting, Paul. Banks can indeed effectively lend out more than the $1,000 you deposit, but not simply by handing out more money than they have. This is due to the way money multiplies through the banking system, known as the money multiplier effect. Don't we all wish we had a money multiplier effect working in our lives? So let's continue on here. This is due to the fact the way money multiplies through the banking system, known as the money multiplier effect. Here's a breakdown. You deposit 1,000, bank lends the money. They say, let's say they lend 900, but we now know they can lend all of it. Spending and redepositing. The person who got the 900 spends it, and eventually this money ends up back in the banking system as deposit in a different bank. Cycle continues. Now this second bank can lend out a majority of that $900. This money too gets spent and redeposited as the process continues. So do we understand what was just said here? I put $1,000 in here. They can loan out 100% of it. Person gets the money. They go spend it. That same 1,000 goes into another bank. Ooh, now they can loan out 100% of that. They get money back from that. And it just continues. So every time money enters a bank, from wherever one of us deposited it, it's like it doubles. And that cycle continues. So money is created at the top, comes down to the banks, and it's created and created and created as money circulates, throughout the economy. So this all has a point. So then I asked if it had a reference in regard to the zero reserve requirement in 2024, because I was kind of shocked at this. And it gave me an article to CEIC data, United States Reserve Requirement Ratio. And it says reserve requirement ratio, local currency demand deposits, United States was set to 0 in February of 2024. So that was something new that I did not know about. And I think it's interesting, if nothing else. Okay, so here's the last question, I think. This is the last question I asked. Can you share with me the direct quotes from the CIA memos regarding the JFK assassination that mention the term conspiracy theory? Here's a direct quote from the CIA memo regarding the JFK assassination. So again, what am I wondering? I'm wondering if they just mentioned it here and there in a memo. Here's what it says. In a memo called Countering Criticism of the Warren Report. That's a clue. That's a clue. There is a specific intention to counter the criticism of the Warren Report. This seems to be something more than just a casual mention of the term. The CIA set out to make the term conspiracy theorist a weapon to be used against anyone who questioned the government's secret activities and the official story of the JFK assassination. This memo indicates the CIA's intention to use the term conspiracy theorist in a way to discredit and challenge those who doubted the official account of the JFK assassination as reported in the Warren Commission. So what do you guys think? Am I reading that wrong? Or does it seem that yes, indeed, if the term conspiracy theory was popularized in the 60s, in other words, the use of it greatly went up, JFK was assassinated in 1963, and if these quotes from internal CIA memos are accurate, it does seem there was a specific intention to use that term as a thought stopper. A thought stopper. And this goes back to what I said at the very beginning of the video. Be very careful about words that stop your thinking. Dig deeper. Look further. Find accurate information. Don't be content to just consume whatever is being put on your plate. Say, yep, that's good. Eat it, especially in areas that greatly affect us. And that's where I want to get to, where all of this, I think, makes sense to how we navigate in this system. Because this is the system. We're learning the rules of the game. Now, we don't want one non-useful way is rage against the machine, complain. That's one thing you can do. What I think is a better way is to understand how the system works and then do the best that we can to make good decisions understanding these things. So Going back to the quote from Elon Musk, money is nothing more than a database for the allocation of resources. And back when the dollar was on the gold standard, in other words, there was a limit to the money, it was a database that retained value. So it was more of an honest thing, I think. But since we now know money's created out of thin air from the top, it's created out of thin air from the banks, what can we assume about that? We can assume that money, dollars, is going to constantly lose value right before our very eyes, right in our hands. We get money and it begins to lose value. You can actually look up the inflation rates in America. Just look up a chart, and what you'll see is inflation is a never-ending increasing chart on all goods and services, for the most part, all goods and services. Now, in an economy where the money was an accurate database for the allocation of resources, the only time you would see prices rise on a product or a service, at least in my understanding, is when the product or service became both scarce and valuable at the same time. So lots of people want it, not much of it. Obviously, the price goes up. But why is it that prices on everything goes up and goes up consistently and predictably? This is something he talks about in this book. It's because, in part at least, if there's a never-ending and increasing supply of cash dollars being dumped into the market and more people have access to more and more money all the time, obviously the prices on the goods and services, which are the real valuable, they're the real value, they're the real resources of which money is supposed to be a database. If there's plenty of money and it just keeps going up, then obviously all the prices are going to continue to rise. So what does this have to do for our daily lives and daily navigation of how we move forward? Well, I think there's two big ones for me. One, I mentioned this book was a great motivator for me. And here's why. And this is just my story. You may not have the same reaction to this. Hey, Danny, good to see you. But here was my reaction. When I learned how the money system worked, everything that we just covered, money created out of thin air, continue to be created, I felt like that was unjust. I felt like it was not right. I felt like there was a more honest way to do it. And part of the emotion in me that stimulates me to a little bit of anger sometimes, I think anger can be useful at times, not uncontrolled anger, but sometimes anger is a great motivator, is when I think about another point that he made in this book, is that when money is initially created, that's when it has the most purchasing power. So if you're at the top of the spigot where the money's coming and being created, and you spend that money right when it comes out, you can buy goods and services for today's prices. But as the money filters down into the economy and the normal people finally get the money, they cannot buy the services at the price that the price was when the money initially came out of the spigot, because now the money supply is increased and all the prices have gone up. So when I think about average, ordinary, everyday people, I have family members that I love and they work hard to make an honest living. And I think about how the prices of goods and services are going to continue to go up and go up and go up and go up. And there's nothing they can do about it. It's people at the bottom of the spigot, of the money spigot, that get hurt through something we call inflation. And this is why they call inflation a hidden tax. It's a hidden tax. And that's part of the reason Congress likes to create money, because if they increased everybody's taxes all the time, people would get angry and they'd get voted out of office. So they have to do it another way. They get money through this other way, through this printing of money. And then all our prices go up. So it's still a tax. It's still a tax on people. It's a hidden tax. So an awareness of this information, and by the way, you don't have to read the whole book. And I'm not saying I agree with every single thing in the book. I would highly recommend watching a video from G. Edward Griffin where he gives you a summation of the main points. And I put one on my blog that I published this last week. You can go read it. And I think it's like the first 45 minutes. You don't have to watch the whole thing. First 45 minutes will give you a summation of this. Explain what we just went through in perhaps different terms, but better terms, more simple terms. But the reason this is important in my view, one reason is I became very motivated via a sense of injustice. When my eyes were open to this, I was like, I don't want to play this game my whole life. I don't want to be the victim of inflation and borrowing money. And that's the other part that's awful about it, is it seems that as prices go up, more and more people are forced to borrow money from the banks because they can't afford houses, cars, food, because the prices are going up. So now they have to go borrow money from the banks that are creating money out of thin air, and then they have to pay that money back with interest with what? With their daily labor, with their work, with their hearts, with their time. They have to pay that. And so it feels so crooked to me, you know? And so I was very motivated. And that's the big first benefit I think there is to going down this rabbit hole and thinking about it, checking it, making sure it's accurate, is it can really serve as a great motivator to get out of debt as fast as possible and stay out of debt so that you're less of a victim. I mean, in some ways, we're all a victim of this system. But if you're not in debt, you're less of a victim because you're not paying back interest on top of this fake money that they're creating and giving to you. You have more control over your life. So that's big takeaway number one, the motivation that it can provide. And the second, I think, great way to apply this information in useful ways is, and this is one thing that's helped me, is a lot of people have this view of cash like it's the almighty dollar. We got to get it. We got to hoard it. We got to save as much of it as we can. But if you always remember that cash, money, is nothing more than a database for the allocation of resources. And so that's one. And two, cash is always going to continue to decline in value. Now all of a sudden you have a perspective on cash that does not cause you to hoard it and collect it. Instead, what it's done for me is it's caused me to instead look for useful resources. I can park my cash. So instead of having cash in the bank deflating all the time, can I take that cash and can I put it in an asset that might increase? Can I take that cash and can I put it in a business where I can earn more money and outpace the cost of inflation? Yes, I can. So money is meant to be used. It's not meant to be stored and hoarded. And this is why Robert Kiyosaki, a famous phrase from him is he says, savers are losers. Savers are losers. Law of success from Napoleon Hill, save money. Got to follow the law. You got to save money. Which one's right? Are savers losers or are you supposed to save? They're both right. You want to save money so you can get to a place where you can park it in assets that will help you earn more income and retain value at a minimum, hopefully increase in value if you're doing a little bit better. You got to save money to be able to do that. So Napoleon Hill is right. But if all you do is save the money and allow it to accumulate and never do anything with it, you're a loser. I mean, I'm not saying you're a loser as a person, but I'm saying you're a loser financially. Because your money's going to continue to decrease in value. You're going to be able to buy less and less and less stuff. So that's why Robert Kiyosaki says savers are losers. No, you're not a loser, Danny. Does that make sense? And so, like, money is meant to be put to use. This is a belief I have. Money is meant to be put in use for the service of self or others, not just hoarded and stacked up. And if you can keep that in mind, I think what it's done for me is it's helped me to make better decisions. I've been able to take some of the cash that we saved up, buy an income producing asset that produces cash flow. Feels like a good decision. But if I didn't understand that money was constantly going down in value and that money is a database for the allocation of resources, I might not have understood how to do that. And then also retain the thought in my mind that when I take cash and I buy an asset, I'm not losing the cash because it's just parked in an asset. So your net worth doesn't go down. It's just a better way to hold and store money. That's one way to put money in service to others that has a return that can be beneficial to you. And then also service of self. You know, we recently bought a new truck, which generally speaking, I think is usually a bad idea because cars go down in value. You don't want to get a loan to buy a car. But we purchased this truck, paid cash for it. Even though it's not going to be a great investment, I looked at that transaction and I said, I would like a nice truck to take my family camping and wanted to use it. And I also am using it in my business for my real estate business. So would I rather have this chunk of dollars that's continuing to depreciate over time, or would I rather put it in a truck that will serve my family, serve my business? Easy choice for me, move that money over. So anyway, that's it, guys. I hope this has been educational. Have you guys learned anything today? Has this been valuable for you? I was really excited to share this information because it's interesting to me, and I also think it's very useful. So I guess that's it. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you guys have an awesome day. Want to encourage you to always go for your dreams, and hope to catch you on a future piece of content. Danny says, been wanting to purchase rental property instead of hoarding. Good idea. Good goal. Great goal. Bill Fever says, very cool, Paul. Awesome. Thank you so much, Bill. Roning says, this was very interesting. Awesome. So happy to hear that. All right, guys. Well, have a great day. I'll catch you later. Bye for now.